Hello, greetings from Sydney. Ian Skinner is apologising. He was meant to come and do a joint song and dance with me, but he's stuck at a higher degree committee meeting. He's hoping to arrive about 2 o'clock, so he'll be here and can answer more questions. So I'm just going to kind of give a cook's tour of things we've been doing with our engineering students and focusing on online learning resources that we've been designing with engineering faculty and with collaborative work we've been doing with Sydney Uni for the last 2, 4, 5 years. Okay, so initially just talk about what's sort of driving all this, internal and external, and how we've kind of been responding to it. We can have a look at all those tomorrow. So just a bit about where I'm coming from. As a learning advisor, seeing writing as an important part of that whole learning process. So this is from Zal's book on the art of changing the brain. It's quite an enjoyable and interesting read about what we know about how our brains work and what they're doing while we're learning. So I kind of like this idea that language is an active way to sort of test, do I really understand it? I think I understand it, but do I really understand it that I can put it in a complex, sort of well-structured form and explain it to someone else? So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and it's a bit like Cole's learning cycle where you kind of got your input and you kind of things going on in your brain, and then there's some output, and I quite like that nice simple model of what we're trying to do when we're writing. So it's not just about writing, it's also about thinking and reading and talking, and all these communication and cognitive processes come together. But writing is our focus at the moment. Drivers coming externally, Engineers Australia has always had as part of its competencies some sort of reference to communication skills in professional domain. So they're interested that students can, write in the register and the genre that's expected in engineering. Our university for years has been claiming that our scholars are capable of effective communication, so we've got to step up to that. And the recent driver is the TEXA Quality Assessment of English Language Proficiency that's coming up this year. Although at the moment they're only reviewing what people are doing about it, because I think they don't know. So they're not going to come around and hit us with a big stick. I think they're just interested in finding out what everyone's doing, and then they'll work out where to go from there. So there's all this external kind of drivers, help make them really good communicators, get them to write well, work in groups and all those things. So challenges we've faced the last few years, or since I've been there at 1998, still not happy with their writing. Maybe I'm not doing a good enough job, but anyway. This is just growing all the time. I remember when I first came to UNSW in 98, they were saying maybe 10, 12% of students were international. Postgrad research engineering students, we know at least 41% of them are international students. Undergrads, I don't know, I think in some schools, some faculties, some programs, it gets up to, well over 40%. So it's really changed in the last 10, 12 years. We're also finding that their previous writing experience maybe hasn't prepared them enough. One's coming overseas, even local students who just do all maths, chemistry, physics, and avoid any writing. So they're kind of a bit rusty, or they're not really used to writing longer texts or more complex texts. This is the third one's an ongoing challenge for us. I'd like to have something more happening in second and third year. At the moment there's a lot of input with writing skills development in first year and then in fourth year, but that's creating problems, which I'll talk about in a moment. These two go together, so you've got, these three. So often we've come up with comments in the past such as, if they can't write, just go and make them do a gen ed subject and they'll do lots of writing. the trouble is students see writing in non-engineering subjects as nothing to do with engineering. So even though they've developed some writing skills, they don't necessarily think to transfer it, and they fall back to old habits. So, and then we have staff saying, well, I can't teach this, I'm not a native English speaker, or I just don't want to teach it. And then we've got learning support staff like me, who, when I started at this university, I was asked, you know, what are you interested in? And I said, oh, I love science fiction. They said, right, you're looking after the engineers. And I said, what's engineering? I just spent 8 years working with nurses and visual arts students and primary school teachers. So I had to go from learning what essays were to learning what reports were. So it's been a big learning curve for me. So we've learnt a lot from each other. And the other ones I think we kind of agree with. Yeah. So from 2005, you may or may not be aware that UNSW developed a draft enabling skills policy. And it was this wonderful plan which my boss calls the promised land. And so what happened was all new students do a lease. Do they have to do it here at ADFA? Okay, so that's all part of, you know, and the other, that's all part of this enabling students. So they all come in, they all do a lease in their first session, and that supposedly helps them get a handle on the information literacy. There's also the recommendation that they do an early writing task like a diagnostic, and we do that in engineering. All first year commencing students do a writing task which we assess and give them feedback. And they're recommended, if they're quite poor, we recommend they go do some credit-bearing courses, and we do have some specifically for engineering. And then hopefully it's also happening within the faculty. So over the years, the writing and the information literacy are continually developed. And that's kind of where we're always sort of struggling and trying to just feel like we have a bigger impact. Okay, so currently, yes, we're doing the diagnostics to all our first years. This year, session 1, we had nearly 1,300 students. Took us a few weeks to get through those. I wanted to do them online, but they told me I would kill Moodle. I would crash the server so we're still doing it with thousands of pieces of paper, which is just crazy. Learning lecturers in charge liaise with the learning advisors, careers advisors, and librarians. So we're often going in as guest lecturers or developing resources, and then they're going into Moodle or Blackboard or some other format. There's a course I run or help run for our research students. So I know I do have some ADFA PhD engineering students, and there's a compulsory course that all commencing higher degree research engineering students have to do. And I'm involved with the Moodle course on that and the marking of the literature reviews and final reports as well. So I train the tutors for that. We try to encourage people to, you know, at least link or embed to all learning centre or other resources that are really useful for their students. And we like to emphasise that, you know, any assignment you give, particularly the engineers, if they don't see it as relevant, they just switch off straight away. So we try, and when you go in and you're talking about a type of report, you've got to kind of link it to the assignment or the learning outcomes, and they tend to pay a bit of attention then. Oh, sorry. And yes, we have a credit-bearing course that any student can do in engineering, and we've even had some non-engineering students do it as an elective as well. And at the moment we're kind of in the middle of this big collaboration with these OLTC projects with Sydney Uni and University of Wollongong. So in terms of diagnostics, what can they tell us? They're very interesting. We have designed a diagnostic tool. It's quite simple, and once you get marking, it only takes about 6 minutes to mark each one. It helps us identify which students are most at risk, and we now have permission. A few years ago we were asking, you know, can we find out more about our students? We were told it was none of our business, so we couldn't even find out our students, you know, whether they were local or international or their gender, all this crazy stuff. Now we're allowed to do that, and we can track them, so we know which programs have the most at-risk students. Ian Skinner did another diagnostic with his fourth year class, and he compared it to their performance in their first year diagnostic, and it was quite depressing. What's happening is most students actually have deteriorated. Okay? And that's not new to some of us. We have students tell us, my English has got worse. And it's the expat colony effect that I call it. Some people call it a ghetto effect, but I think that's quite negative. You know, it's like a little, you look in the lecture and there's like 80% are Chinese. So what are they going to talk about with each other? They're not going to talk in English. Okay, it's so much easier. So we're not surprised that we're seeing this happening. Now this is just from one sample group. Doesn't mean it's happening in all schools. So they're very interesting tools. And this is students in a course, elective course. They did an entry and exit diagnostic. So this is the change. So they're improving in structure. Some stayed the same. And that's not a problem because some of them came in and we already said, well, your structure of your writing is already quite good. So if they stay the same, we're not that worried. Although if they were low and they didn't change, we were a bit worried. And I don't know, for some reason, some always get a little bit worse, but that wasn't happening too much. So in the short term, we're certainly able to really improve the structure of their writing. Things like grammar and vocabulary just take a bit longer to develop. So this is only like a 12-week course. You're trying to make changes in a number of different areas. So they're very interesting tools, diagnostics. And if you'd like to know more about the diagnostics we use them in non-engineering courses as well. COFA uses them. I think there's social work. There might be, and a few other, and law I think uses them as well. So we've got lots of different examples in built environment of different ways you can do these masses type diagnostic tools. This is the elective course that anyone can do. We've even put postgrad students in there. And one of the issues we identified years ago talking to students and just looking at how they research or how they don't research is these students don't read. They don't even read newspapers, not even online. And it's quite depressing, really. And we have students who said, I've never read a book, like a novel. So we go, right, you're going to read a science fiction book. So they have to find a science fiction story. They also do they can also choose any topic they like about a future challenge for engineering, and they can write their own report. So they have to research that and write it up. But we have students who say, this is the first time I've ever read a whole book. And I go, okay, would you do it again? Probably not. So I didn't win them over there. But do you now like science fiction? Maybe. So I don't know. I'm trying to turn them on to that it's through reading that it helps you think and learn, and then through writing you test and clarify and learn further. So I think people were mentioning those similar issues earlier. So that's an elective course that pretty much anyone can do. We are not overwhelmed, even though from our 1,300 students, the last 4 or 5 years we've been doing it, we're consistently finding about 40% of the cohort who we're worried about. I mean, if this is a sample of your writing, and if this is the best you can do, it's not good enough. And so we don't get overwhelmed. We only get a couple of students a year who want to do the course. We make it up with students doing exchange. A lot of exchange students like to do it because it's got no prerequisites. And we get sometimes students doing other kinds of university entry programs. So now the exciting one is, I've got 10 minutes, going online. So all that other stuff is face-to-face and a bit of a grind, and we decided to go online. So in 2010, we got an ALTC grant, and it changed to OLT halfway through, for this website called iWrite, which kind of evolved out of an earlier one we developed with Sydney Uni Engineering and Learning Centres called RISE. So this one was much more ambitious. The RISE one was just, here are some standalone resources on different kinds of report genres. that you can use in science or engineering. This one actually is a bit more of a total package, and it's a bit like a mini LMS, a mini Moodle, where it's not just here are some resources and exercises and practice in writing, but here's where you can manage assignments, track students, observe how they're behaving and things like that. So there's some differences in it, that it's got some interesting text mining tools that Sydney Uni have developed, which are quite useful for giving feedback and just looking at how students are performing. So the website's there. Anyone can access the tutorials. They're all open access, Creative Commons. If you want access to the administration side for building the assignments and the feedback tools, that's something we're inviting people to come and be involved with. So how it works is the main centre here. So this is the area that's publicly available, the iWrite site with all the tutorials. This diagnostic one, we're trying to come up with a semi-automatic diagnostic tool where we can have a tool that you put the text in there and it'll just find the top, sort of the really good writers and the really poor writers. And then we're hoping that way we don't need to use so many human markers. The tool's nowhere near available to assess in between kind of writing. It's just very simple at the moment. So they're still working on that one. And then this is sort of like the learning management system side of it, where you can have, you can use, there's peer review tools in it and automatic feedback tools as well, and places to build your assignments. So it kind of looks like this. This is a tutorial page. And so what we have is, when Rafa originally conceived of this, he wanted to follow the CDIO kind of stages of conceive, something, implement, design, operate, yeah. So he set it up where you've got sort of writing that might go on pre or early in the project, writing you might be doing during the project, and final report writing. So there's lots of different types of ones in there. And some of these, we actually just ripped them out of RISE and we've transferred them over, because the RISE site we developed was also Creative Commons as well. So we spent a year building. I'm running around begging people to give me past student assignments because I decided there's nothing online about writing engineering design reports, so I designed a tutorial module for design reports in engineering. So that was fun. And this year now we've got another project to extend it further. So a typical page has a bit of an explanation and I try to visualise some of the information because I know my engineering students don't like to read. So I try to make it as visual as I can, but still maybe hopefully stimulating their brains. And we actually, from all the reports that we got, I've got boxes of them there, most of them terrible, some of them quite good, got students' permission, and we've kind of taken them, not really touched them. I like to use authentic student writing. And I think students really appreciate that as well. They see, well, that's, at this stage, that's how I should be writing. They get a bit intimidated if the writing's too sophisticated. And so they can see lots of example extracts from reports. And there's another section further down where they can actually do some exercises. And I based those on, when I looked at all the marks they were getting for the reports, and I worked out which were the areas that most people seem to be getting the lower marks. And so things like writing a problem statement, they just don't seem to be able to do that. And there was a lot of confusion about how you present results of testing and things like that. So it's not really a language site in that sense. It's sort of information that any student would benefit from. So in the admin part, these are the different tools you can use. So it's, as I said, it's like a mini learning management system. The text mining tools are quite interesting, And what that means is so the tutor here has looked at this assignment and they're deciding to give feedback, and what you do is, it's a bit like, I think what you can do in gradebook in Turn It In, but what this does is, so if you give it a grade, it automatically starts building an email with pre-formatted comments based on that grade and a URL link to the tutorial part that would help them solve that. So it's kind of this feedback loop happening. So I quite like this tool, the idea that I can just click on a grade and it's automatically building an email that the student receives with targeted feedback for them. So that's quite interesting as well. So iWrite, it's quite a good model. There's lots of different ways you can think about using it, and we're hoping people will come on board. So it helps us, just clarify things with our students, and because of the tutorials and the feedback grading system, you can really help students understand what the expectations are and how far they've met them. It helps you maybe design authentic tasks, so quite flexible in that way. And we kind of feel this reading, writing nexus very important. So reading about the types of reports and reading to give peer review and then all the writing that goes with it. I think that's quite a good model. And using all real models and all these things. And these ones are quite interesting as well. You can actually track and see, because they use Google Docs, which apparently now does cope with equations, which was a problem 2 years ago when we were trying to use Google Docs and the students sort of rebelled because they couldn't put equations in it. But it's very interesting because with all the tracking tools within the site, you can see interesting patterns with how teams are working together in terms of document preparation, and that might help with understanding how you can better direct your students or guide them. Okay. So the current challenges are, as someone mentioned earlier, why tell them about it 2 weeks earlier? They're only going to look at it the night before. And we actually had to change the design because the original iWrite website, we kind of had this imaginary student who would, start using the website, weeks before and, go in there. And of course, when we did all the feedback, they said, well, I looked at it the night before and I couldn't find what I wanted. There was all these quizzes and tests and exercises. And we went, oh, okay. So we've kind of flipped it around with iWrite, where we're much more upfront about here's the information you need, and we back-ended all the exercises and that. So, and so these were the reasons students were saying. And I mean, yesterday I was in a lecture where it was supposed to be 150 students. I think I had about 60 to 70, and I was telling them about the resources. So I'm not surprised a lot of students say they don't know about it or they forget, So they don't even read their emails, but anyway. And this one was quite a concern. There was, some students think anything we do to explain about writing is because you're not a native English speaker. So I have a hard time convincing students that just because you're a native speaker doesn't make you a really good writer. Sometimes your writing can be just as bad or if worse than, So that's a real tough one to get them to shift their thinking. And the one thing we're noticing is that it tends to be the more experienced writers who use these resources. So that people who've had a bit more writing practice, we survey them and we can sort of separate them out. Students who've had a bit more writing experience seem to be more self-aware of what's involved in writing. So they're more likely to use the resources. So my challenge is to get the sort of novice writer, native speaker to get onto these resources. And we have data we can show them that shows that students who do use, who do use the site tend to get better marks on average than students who never use the site. So my argument is it won't hurt you. It's not going to cause you any pain. And the other one is, not just forget, but the students who are at risk Yeah, they seem to think, yes, I know I'm not a very good writer and I know I need to do things, but I don't have time because I'm really struggling with just getting through the reading or the assignments. So it's trying to convince them that, look, it's these tutorials and that they only take a couple of hours. You've got 168 hours in the week. Surely you can find half an hour here, half an hour there. Go in, do the exercises. It's really hard to get them. Getting into the curriculum, particularly in the second and third year, so that there's some consistent use of the resources and refining of their writing skills, so that we don't end up with that awful situation in fourth year where they've actually got worse. And the other challenge is, oh God, it's another thing I've got to learn to use, and I've just got into Moodle, you know. And just knowing how to use, I mean, this idea of, when people talk about, yeah, YouTube's great for mathematical videos, and I tried to use those to help my son in the HSC. So it's a wonderful resource, but maybe people aren't so sure about that. There are things we can do online to help people with writing. It's, you know, so come and talk to us. And the sustainability issues are, well, I got a tablet for Christmas from Santa, and the first thing I did was, I wonder if my online resources work with a touchscreen. It's already out of date. Like, you know, we've got students there with these iPad things, you know, and it's all just touch screen, you know. So we've got to think about that. So there's a real sustainability issue, and the other issue is that with these OLTC projects, we only guarantee to maintain these. The open site is only guaranteed to be maintained for 2 years. I mean, we've kept iWrite going for about 5 or 6 years, but that's no guarantee that they will be there forever. So there's sustainability issues as well. So we're up to stage 2, where we've got iWrite there. They're now trying to build more sophisticated tools and looking at ways that, you know, what are the challenges that face us, and how can we maybe better support writing development in engineering. So if you're interested, Sarah and Rafa are the project leaders, and we're interested in people joining us. So tomorrow I'm going to have a lab demo, and you can come and play. And I'll also show other online tools. I've got a Moodle course for any UNSW student to enrol in on academic skills, which is basically essay writing, paraphrasing, summarising. I'm happy to show that. We've got the RISE site, and we've got iWrite as well.